On the morning of July 11, 1995, frightened families crowded the roads and the grounds of a United Nations base at Potocari outside Srebrenica. The blue UN flag promised safety, but Bosnian Serb soldiers were entering the town, and the lightly armed peacekeepers could not stop them. How did a place formerly declared safe become the setting for genocide? What followed was not simply a military defeat. More than 8,000 Bosniak men and boys were killed, while women, children, and elderly people were forcibly expelled. The story of Srebrenica begins in the chaos of the Bosnian War. After the breakup of Yugoslavia, ethnic tensions erupted into brutal conflict. Bosniaks, Croats, and Serbs fought for control of territory and identity across towns, valleys, roads, and river crossings. In 1993, the United Nations declared Srebrenica a safe area, hoping to protect its Bosniak population. Crowds of displaced civilians entered an enclave already short of food and shelter. But the protection was fragile because the mandate was limited, resources were insufficient, and the political will to enforce the promise was absent. By July 1995, the situation had deteriorated. The Bosnian Serb army, led by General Ratko Mladic, launched an offensive to seize the enclave. The UN peacekeepers, known as Dutchbat, were lightly armed, constrained by a limited mandate, and vastly outmatched. Requests for decisive air support were delayed, and the small contingent could not stop the advance. Thousands of civilians converged on the Dutchbat base at Potocari, while another large group tried to escape through the forest toward Bosnian government territory. On July 11th, Bosnian Serb soldiers entered the town and moved toward the crowded base. At Potocari, uniformed troops separated men and boys from women, children, and elderly people near buses, doors, and warehouse buildings. Some males were detained there. Thousands of others joined a column attempting to cross forested hills and roads toward Tuzla. Women, children, and elderly people were forced onto buses and expelled from the enclave, often without knowing where husbands, sons, or brothers had been taken. The killing operation spread across schools, fields, warehouses, farms, and execution sites in the surrounding region. Prisoners were transported along roads, held under guard, and murdered in organized mass shootings. Bodies were buried in primary graves. Later, heavy machinery reopened many sites and moved remains into secondary graves along woods, fields, and river valleys. That concealment fractured individual remains across different locations, but it also left a physical record that investigators could reconstruct. The international community was slow to react. Reports of the killings began to emerge, but the response was inadequate. The world watched as the genocide unfolded, but the mechanisms of prevention and protection failed. The UN, NATO, and the international community were unable to stop the slaughter. The failure was not just a military one, it was a moral and political failure. The world had promised to protect Srebrenica, and it had failed. The failure had several connected layers. A Security Council declaration had created the safe area, but the soldiers on the ground did not possess the manpower, weapons, transport, or clear authority needed to defend it against a major offensive. Air power depended on a chain of requests and political approval. When limited NATO strikes finally came on July 11th, they did not reverse the seizure. Meanwhile, communications from the enclave moved through military and diplomatic hierarchies, while civilians were already gathering at Potocari or walking through the forest. The gap between a promise written in New York and the force available in eastern Bosnia became the central danger. Because each institution controlled only part of the response, delay could be explained inside the system, even as its combined consequence became catastrophic. That does not erase the agency of the Bosnian Serb officers and units that planned and carried out the crimes. It explains why the international barrier placed in their path proved so weak. However, the attempt to conceal the crime changed how the evidence had to be found rather than erasing it. In the years that followed, investigators searched fields and grave sites, and the quest for truth expanded into courtrooms and laboratories. According to the surviving judicial record, the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia prosecuted those responsible for the atrocities. The trials revealed the command structure and the scope of the crime. The ICTY concluded that the killings at Srebrenica constituted genocide and convicted senior perpetrators. The International Court of Justice later held that genocide had occurred at Srebrenica and that Serbia had violated its obligation to prevent genocide and its duty to cooperate fully with the tribunal, while not finding Serbia itself directly responsible for committing the genocide. The identification of the victims became a central part of the quest for justice. The International Commission on Missing Persons helped families find their loved ones by building a large DNA-led identification system. The process is painstaking. A sample from a bone may be compared with blood samples donated by several living relatives, Because bodies were moved between graves, investigators can sometimes associate remains from one person recovered at multiple sites. A name therefore rests not on a guess or a single photograph, but on converging scientific and forensic evidence. Families can wait for years for enough remains to be identified and released for burial. The work restores identity to people whom the perpetrators tried to reduce to hidden fragments, while the distribution of those fragments can also corroborate the operation used to conceal the graves. Courtrooms assembled a different but connected record. Judges considered intercepted communications, military orders, witness testimony, demographic evidence, execution sites, and the movement of prisoners and bodies. Separate proceedings did not answer every legal question in exactly the same way. Criminal tribunals judged individual guilt, while the International Court of Justice examined state responsibility under the Genocide Convention. That distinction matters. The careful language of a judgment can sound narrower than public memory, but it identifies who is legally responsible for what, under which standard of proof. The resulting record established beyond reasonable doubt in criminal cases that the Srebrenica killings were genocide and imposed life sentences on senior figures including Ratko Mladic and Radovan Karadzic. Today, the work continues. The Potocari Memorial Center stands as a place of remembrance. It is a place where families can come to mourn, to remember, and to seek justice. The memorial is a testament to the victims. It is a place where the names of the dead are read, where the stories of the survivors are told, and where the world is reminded of the cost of indifference. In 2026, on the 31st anniversary of the fall of Srebrenica, the work of remembrance and justice continues. Current reporting from the ICMP and the Potocari Memorial Center indicates that 10 newly identified victims are being buried today. These are not just numbers. They are fathers, sons, brothers, and grandfathers. They are individuals whose lives were cut short, whose families were torn apart, and whose stories are now part of the historical record. Over 1,000 victims remain missing. The search for the truth is not over. The denial of the genocide continues to be a challenge. Some deny that the killings happened. Some deny that it was genocide, but the evidence is clear. The courts have spoken. The families have spoken. The world has a responsibility to remember. The story of Srebrenica is a story of failure. It is a story of the limits of international protection. It is a story of the cost of indifference, but it is also a story of resilience. It is a story of the families who have refused to give up. It is a story of the survivors who have spoken out. It is a story of the international community that has been called to account. The genocide at Srebrenica is a stark reminder of the importance of the responsibility to protect. It is a reminder that the world must act when the rights of people are violated. It is a reminder that the failure to act can have catastrophic consequences. It is a reminder that the search for truth and justice is never over. As we remember the victims of Srebrenica, we must also remember the lessons of the past. We must remember the cost of indifference. We must remember the importance of prevention. We must remember the responsibility to protect. And we must remember that the search for truth and justice is a duty that we all share. The story of Srebrenica is not just a story of the past. It is a story of the present. It is a story of the future. It is a story that we must continue to tell so that the world never forgets, so that the world never fails again, so that the victims are never forgotten, so that the truth is never denied. This is history made clear. We rebuild the past from evidence, context, and consequence. We remember the victims of Srebrenica. We honor their memory. We seek justice. And we commit to a future where such atrocities never happen again.